And thank you for spotlighting me. I'm very big in my screen today. And so really, thank you for joining this experiment. It's the first time for a GP storytelling workshop where we work with our community to on how to write stories and how to make stories with regards to open government. As I say, turn your camera on so that I can see your faces, at least at this initial stage, and then we'll go on with the presentation. So today we are going to discuss about what makes a good open government story. And today with me, I have a lot of people and staff from my organization that are helping us. First of all, I just wanted to tell you that this is meant to be like a very interactive and informative session. So feel free to jump in, ask questions in the chat box and introduce yourself like my colleague Maya has already asked. We're going to go through a few elements of what makes a good open government stories. But before doing that, we just wanted to start with like a sort of an inspiring speech from maybe an outsider from the open government community. And this person is a friend that has been working with me already in the past. She's a radio and TV journalist. She's been broadcasting for more than 25 years. And she's currently a radio and TV presenter for BBC World Service. And this person is Sasha Twining. So Sasha, thank you very much for being here with us today. And why did we decide to ask Sasha to join us today? Well, we wanted a perspective from someone who is by nature looking for stories, right? Like she's a journalist, so she's looking for stories to cover. And it will be interesting to know and have like a different perspective than the open government community on. So Sasha, what drives the interest for you when you're looking for stories? What are those stories that are capturing your interest, and how are you covering them? So this is the thing that we want to see with you. And thank you very much for accepting our invite. And the floor is yours. Thank you again.
Marco, thank you very much. And hello. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure and it's a privilege to speak to you all, wherever you are, in whatever time of the world you are today. Thank you. Just a little bit more about me. Marco's absolutely right. I'm currently presenting for the World Service, the BBC World Service. So that is a global radio station broadcast around the world. You probably may well have listened to it. Currently, I'm working on business programs. So I present 2 different business programs, but they also encapsulate politics, social interest stories, anything that makes a good story. Prior to working at the BBC, I've worked for international television broadcasters. So again, looking for good stories that will engage with an audience. And then here in the UK, I'm based in London, and in the UK, I formerly worked for an organisation called IRN, Independent Radio News. And that supplied radio news stories to the entire radio network of the United Kingdom. So in that, we had to find stories that would appeal to people right across the United Kingdom. So I hope you will agree, I've got a lot of experience in knowing what makes a good story. It's not just what makes a good story, though. It's how you tell it. And I think that is just as important as spotting a good story, is working out how to tell it, how to engage and interest your audience. Now, when I knew that I was going to be speaking to you, I made a few notes about what I feel makes a good story. So if you don't mind, let me refer to my notes now. First of all, this is one of 4 things that I'm going to tell you about. A story should be immediate and urgent. So we're looking for immediacy and urgency. What do I mean by that? Well, that could be a story that is happening right now, and it's important to cover it and talk about it right now. That could be a protest, a demonstration, something that is happening. It's urgent and it's immediate and it needs to be covered right now. Or it could be a story that is something to do with the date, like it is the day that a new piece of research comes out. So it's urgent and immediate for that day. So think of the time when you're looking for stories. Then I want you to think of the relevance to your audience. What do I mean by that? Well, work out who your audience is. Is it relevant to them? Are they directly involved? Is this going to impact them or affect them? For example, is this story about the price of food at the moment? Are they people who shop in the market where the price of wheat has had a huge impact on the price of everyday staples? Is it relevant to your audience? And then the next thing that I would look at is relatability. Now, relatability and relevance are two different things. It can be relevant to your audience because they're directly involved, or they can relate to it. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take the example of the food prices going up in whatever country that you are in. Even if you are not buying wheat or bread that day, you can relate to food prices. So someone listening in the United Kingdom can still relate to food prices going up in Tanzania, in America, wherever it is. These are common themes of a story. It may not be directly relevant to them, but they can understand the concepts behind. And then my final thing that I'd like you to think about is accountability. What does that mean? Well, for you, I think this is particularly important because this is where stories, the people behind the stories have to be accountable. And with this, I would also put in the facts, the research. What makes that story good? Is it something that's happened that you've uncovered that you want to tell your audience about? And who is it that has to comment on this story? And there's a fifth one as well. This one, I can't teach you, but this is the one that you will have inside yourself. And it's called the gut feeling. Now, I can't explain what it is about a particular story that makes me love it. Sometimes there's just something about it that makes me think I want to tell other people. Now, I would suggest that if you hear about a story and you want to go home and tell your partner, your brother, your sister, your parents, your partner, whoever it is, if you want to tell them, that's the gut feeling. And if you want to tell someone, tell lots of people. That to me is what makes a good story. And then of course there is how you tell it. And I promise you, there are always good stories that are lost because people don't know how to tell them properly. What do I mean by that? Well, work out how you want to tell the story. Who is going to tell this story? Is it yourself? And are you the best person to tell this story? Or could this story be told better by somebody else? Somebody at the heart of it? Someone that maybe it directly impacts? Could they tell it better than you? You can guide them and help them, but could they tell it better? Is there someone else? Maybe a collection of voices, different people to tell your story. And how are you going to tell it? Is it with audio, just voices? Is it video? Are you going to be able to film it where this story happened? Let me go back to the example of the protest, that protest, which for me is news. It's a story because it's immediate. You have to show the protest. Are you going to be able to do that? Hear from people taking part in the protest. There is very little point of trying to tell a story about a protest if you're sitting in a studio and no one can see what's happening. Make it relevant to people by showing them what's happening. Now, when I knew I was going to do this talk, I reached out to some of my colleagues at the BBC and said, what to you makes a good story? So if it's all right with you, I'm just going to share a couple of things that they told me. First of all, this one is from Joshua. Now, Joshua plans stories for the BBC. So he looks at diaries and he decides what the BBC is going to cover. And he said to me, I would simply say, letting the people at the heart of the story tell the story. Hearing from those affected is so much more powerful than those who are one step removed. Get the people's voices. And then we have Jamie, who said, and this is an interesting thing to discuss, at the heart of every story is conflict. Every story needs conflict. One person says or does one thing and another person opposes it. You have 2 points of view, and without that, there is no story. And then Philippa, who has covered from many war zones in the past, says there has to be jeopardy. Plus, you have to make the listeners care. And again, that's getting the right voices to tell your story. In the couple of minutes I have left, I just would like to give you an example of something that one of my colleagues put together on the BBC for the World Service. And it was during the pandemic. And obviously during the pandemic, there were millions of stories. Every single person had a story. Every country had different stories to tell. And we wanted to hear from a country that very few people would have heard from because of the difficulty sometimes of getting news from that particular area. And so my colleague Ed and his producer Frey decided that they wanted to hear from an informal settlement in Nairobi. It's a tricky place actually to get a story from unless you're on the ground. And we were in London, and of course, there was no way of getting there. And so Ed contacted a charity that worked in that area and said, we'd like to speak to someone in this informal settlement. And they said, well, we're working with a couple of families and we have some roots in there. Let me try and put you in touch with someone. And they put Ed in touch with someone called Josephine. Now, Josephine lives and still lives in this informal settlement. She's a single parent, a single mother, bringing up her family. And so Ed contacted Josephine and the charity said, okay, we'll put you in touch. Josephine had a mobile phone. She had a smartphone and she got a message from the charity with a phone number for Ed. And she wasn't really quite sure when to call him. So what she did was record a voice note on her mobile phone and sent it to Ed. And he was at home in London in lockdown and got a voice note. And he thought, this is amazing. So he sent one back to Josephine. And between them, they started on voice notes to get her to tell the story of what was happening in this informal settlement. The fears she had for sexual assault on her children, the illness, the sickness that was quite literally sweeping through the settlement. And so every day she would record voice notes of what was happening and she would send them to Ed, and she would have to wait until her next door neighbour turned on the electricity in the evening so that she could use someone else's broadband and send the notes. And she talks about everything that happens in her life. And we thought this is an amazing story because it's urgent. This is something that's happening now. It's relatable because everyone is having a different experience in the pandemic, but this story needs to be told. And the audience, the listeners, loved it, so much so that they actually put together a GoFundMe account to help Josephine when she decided she wanted to start her own business within the settlement. Let's take a look at Josephine. Let's have a look and see if we can put a picture up of what we then did with all these voice notes. We turned them into a whole series of programs, and it was an audio diary from inside an informal settlement. I don't know whether you can see at the moment or not, but we'll try and show you the picture later of Josephine with her children standing there. And so we turned them into lots of different programs, and it had a huge impact. And of course, that is the best way to tell a story, the person who is involved telling it in their own words and getting to a huge audience. Lots of different examples there, lots of different things I know to think about. Hopefully it's given you some food for thought, and I'm very happy to stay around and answer any questions or contribute as we go through your workshop. Marco, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Here it is, the story that you just shared, and these audio diaries from Nairobi. Maybe in the follow-up email that we send, we can also share like the hypertext link so that people can have a look and also listen to it. But Sasha, thank you very much.
Oh, I think we lost Marco.
I think Marco might have gone.
Yep.
Hello.
The connection. Oh, there we go. He's back.
I froze for a second. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
So yes, I was saying, thank you very much, Sasha. Like everything you said really resonates with what we are going to discuss today. You're staying online, and together we will comment a few of the exercises that we ask our participants to go through today. And Maya, we can go on with the presentation, and we can start going more towards the core, let's say, of this workshop. And introduce you, first of all, why we are doing it and where does it come from. So basically, it was last year for the 10-year anniversary of OGP that we launched Open Stories, which is a website that we meant for the community to share stories of open government and reforms, and really the progress that is done on the ground by civil society organizations, by governments, working together to improve lives of citizens. And we really meant it not as an OGP website, but really for the community to share their stories with us. Today, we are basically doing this workshop for the community. So feel free to ask questions. And as we speak, if you have doubts or comments or suggestions, like feel free to jump in and write your comments there. Today, we are going to use a sort of collaborative tool to help us make this session a little bit more dynamic and interactive, which is called Jamboard. Maya, if we can share how this works together. First of all, let me introduce you to Maya. She's my colleague at OGP, and she's going to tell us a little bit how to use Jamboard, which is this collaborative tool that we are going to ask you throughout this session to use to populate with your ideas. Thank you, Maya.
Thanks, Marco. Good morning, everyone. So you should be all seeing the screen that says character in front of you now. This is incredibly easy. One of my colleagues will put the link in the chat. You click on that, and then it will take you to the Jamboard. And once you're there, you will see this little icon here on the left that allows you to create a little sticky note. You can change the color as you like, and then just start typing away, and it'll show up right here on the board. There you go. And if you click on the little dots here in the top corner, you can edit and change it. And we can all see what we are thinking and engage with each other. We have a number of boards prepared. You can, as we progress through the workshop, just click on the little arrow whenever we indicate, and we'll move to the next one. If you have any issues, just let me know, and I'll be happy to help sort that. And you can just delete your sticky note with the delete button, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Maya. And you can also see in the screen that you see that we already have a few post-its done. Why? Well, because this is the second session of the workshop. Yesterday, we already worked with a group of people that already has input a few post-it for us to consider, and maybe it's good that you have these examples. So we decided to keep them. We could have deleted them, but we decided to keep them to give you like an inspiration, to give you ideas on, you know, what we are expecting you to write, and then we can discuss it together during the session. So if we go back to the presentation, we can start our journey together. And before starting the journey together and going through 4 elements, so we are also like very aligned with Sasha's 4 elements, or 5 elements that she described earlier. One question to keep in mind: how do the elements that I'm going to present you today, how are they applying to your story? So we don't want it to be like a frontal lesson where I'm telling you, okay, this is how you write a story. Yes, this is instructions. These are like ideal way of writing a story. But then the most difficult exercise is how to apply it to what you have in mind, and how to make it relatable, how to highlight conflicts, how to highlight a character. And we're going through it today. And we can start with the first of these elements that we'd like you to consider when writing a story. And we can start from a character. And it's good because it's really related to Sasha's element of relatability, for example. Like having a character definitely helps you with that. And here in this photo, we have Mabel, who is a gender activist, has been a gender activist in Argentina for over 50 years. And who better than her to describe what's the gender fight in Argentina and gender equality? To the point that today, when we refer to this story, we don't say gender equality in Argentina, we say Mabel's story. We really want to have someone that is at the core of this narrative, that can definitely describe with passion what does it look like to say this story. So if we can go to the next slide, we can just like see what do we mean by character, and why does it matters? Why do we want you to focus on a character when thinking of a story? Well, the definition, it's pretty simple. It's this person that is really at the center of the story, and there's no one better than this person that can say this story. Who can it be? Well, if we think about an open government perspective, we work with reformers that can be within or outside the government, but it can also be a person that is being impacted by a reform. And why this is important to us? Well, because what we do within open government is about us, it's about citizens. If it's affecting someone else's life, I should care about it. And we really want to ignite this sense of relatability here by having a strong character that can say the story with passion. And this is what helps the reader and the listener to connect and to make the story relatable. So again, we are using similar language than what Sasha has described before, but I promise you that I didn't share with Sasha the presentation beforehand. So it's really because this is probably the key. We're human beings, we're looking for feelings, we're looking for these stories that can inspire us and really create this collective change together. And how can we make this character relatable? Well, we show what this character does, what this character stands for or has experienced. And that's the story that I told you before about Mabel. That's the story from Nigeria that Sasha was describing before. And we can, of course, if you write the story, use quotes and anecdotes that will help enhance the narrative. And why do we do all that? Again, because it's not your story alone, but the good stories together that can create a movement of inspiration for others. And it's really the nature of OGP, right? We are a global organization where we have 77 countries, and every country can learn from the other one. So a Nigerian can learn from a Spanish person and get inspired by the activities and the reforms that are done on the other side of the globe. If we can go to the next slide, we can see a few examples of what do we mean by character when we think about OGP that are also reflected in the Jamboard that I shared, that Maya shared with you earlier. Again, we have kind of 3 categories of characters, but that doesn't mean that these categories have to be so strict. But we can discuss together later. But we kind of identified these 3 categories that to us are kind of obvious. One of them is the government reformer, that is implementing a reform within government. Then we have civil society activists that are really working outside government to push on some issues. And there are the citizens that are impacted by those reforms. And here you see photos of people that we actually work with, and we did video with them. And then we really want to invite you to think, what did I just say? How does this apply to your story? And for doing that, we are using Jamboard, and we want you to start populating Jamboards. So you saw that the link has been shared in the chat box, so we can see together. Now we can share the screen, and I really want you to start inputting a few of those into the screen. And while you're doing that, we will comment together with Sasha and with Maya what's going on, and ask a few questions about what we've been just discussing. So Sasha, how does this resonate, this first element, this character, with what you shared earlier? And in the meanwhile, if you guys want to start sharing on Jamboard, we can all see on the screen, and we can also unmute you if you want to have a questions or have a chat with us. Feel free to jump in.
Okay, thank you. I think character-led is just so fundamental to a good story. You have to feel an emotion towards that character. You don't have to like them. You could actually dislike them, but you need to have a strong character at the heart of your story. And if you can find a character that you know people will like, then your story is on to a winner immediately. And you know, the example that you've just used, Marco, and the example that I used earlier from Josephine, you don't have to be living in an informal settlement in Nairobi to understand what Josephine was going through. So your character, and when we talk about the woman from Argentina, your character, you don't have to be the same as the character to relate to it. We are all humans, and that human characteristic will mean that you can relate. So whether it was Josephine concerned about how her children were growing up, how she was going to pay for the next meal, or how to communicate with others and get her services sorted, her electricity, her water, everything. Those are really relatable subjects and topics. So I think, Marco, you're absolutely right.
Yes, and we can see together, you know, we have a first input here. So one character, Sarah, a mother who took her concern about the resources and infrastructure in schools and advocated for her kids. That's exactly the type of stories that we will cover. And feel free to really think through these questions while we go on with the presentations. Like, I know this is something that you really need to spend a few minutes thinking about. And sometimes Sasha and Maya, especially with Maya, we work with stories where it's not that obvious to find a character to put in the spotlight, you know, and maybe starting with a character can disincentivize a few people today here that are listening. So while we go through with the presentation, I want you always to keep in mind that there are these, we call it the 4 C's of storytelling. Maybe character isn't the most obvious one, but let's go on with the presentation. Let's see what's the next C that we're going to introduce. And in the meanwhile, keep in mind that the Jamboard is always open. And also, I wanted to remind you that maybe some of you that are with us today, they've already used Your Story Short. If you use Your Story Short, which is this form that we created at OGP to really start triggering these questions, just write it in the chat so that we want to know how many of you have used it. And we actually use these 4Cs while building the form of your story short. So you will see that a few of those questions will resonate with you throughout the presentation. But let's continue with the presentation, and the Jamboard is always open, so let's keep an eye there, and we're gonna get through the context now, and then we're gonna go back to Jamboard and see how this is progressing. So we've spoken about a character, and now it's time to put this character into context. This photo here in particular is about a video that we've done last year about South Korea. Children in South Korea that proposed together with their teacher to the government a few policy guidelines. And in this case, it's to encourage the government to recycle disposable ice packs that were coming with food that was delivered frozen at schools. So we really can see here how citizens are working together with the government to make things moving and to make things better. All those videos are available today on Open Stories, and I invite you all to see them if you didn't have the time to do that until now. But here it's really putting it into a context. This happened also during the pandemic, so it's really related to a particular specific moment. One of those other elements that Sasha described before, like now, it's happening now. So we really want to highlight what's happening right now in this particular context. If we go through the next slide, we can see what do we mean by context and why putting your character into a context is so important. Well, context is pretty self-explanatory. It's the setting of the stories. It answers to the questions, where did it happen and why your location is unique. But why does this matter? We need to think that the Open Government Partnership, working with 77 countries, it's a pretty global organization. So it's really important to have this connection very strong, so that your story can be relevant and relatable for a global audience. So we really think about the context as the backdrop of your stories, because it grounds your stories and situates the character in a location, in a particular moment. And this helps really the listener and the reader to relate with the story. As I was saying before, writing these stories for a global audience, it's really what we need to have in mind, because if we want to make them relevant, we want the reader that is not familiar with your context to actually understand it and grasp it. Not everybody can relate to a story that I'm saying about Italy, which is my home country, because you might not have all the elements that it takes to relate to my situation. So I need to give these elements. It doesn't mean that we need to write paragraphs and paragraphs, but really to place it in a context. And we have an example after this slide so that I can really show you. And it's also about Italy, so it's even more relatable. We did this video last year in Calabria. Some of you might think of Italy as this amazing place where you go on holiday and it's sunny, there's good food, and that's it. Well, in this particular case, the story is about Calabria, which is one of the poorest regions in Italy and in Europe. And already by saying you this, you immediately understand that there's a context in place. I understand that in this region, people, especially young people, they have a hard time to find work. Not just because of lack of work, but also because of of mafia and criminalized organizations in the country. So this really puts the reader that is not familiar with the region into the context. And immediately you can understand that this Alessandra, this student that we interviewed, you understood immediately her issues and you start relating to her. So what do we want to do in this Jamboard exercise together with you? We want you to think about a context that is really helpful for setting the scene for a global audience. So where did this project that you want to write a story about happen? What makes this location unique? What are those elements that allows us to connect with your context? And now we can go back to the Jamboards and see and start having this conversation already. You can see that we had a few post-it that have been shared with us yesterday. So really, don't be shy, put your ideas in there. The objective is really even to discuss together with us in case you have doubts also and you're not sure what to put. Like here, there are a lot of people that are sharing the same struggles as you are. So this is not meant as OGP telling you what to do, but it's really sharing together. How do we make sure that we capture these contexts right for a global audience? And Sasha, maybe related to that, like this connection to a global audience and why should I care about your stories? Like, for example, the story that you shared about Nairobi. How did you make sure that this was something that an audience that wasn't from that location could relate to?
Absolutely. Well, with Josephine's story, it was what she talked about, because those themes were similar to so many people. But if I may, looking at this and listening to you, I'm just going to quickly share another example. It was something from just 10 days ago. And on the face of it, it seems like a really dull business story, and that is Malaysia has stopped exporting chicken to other countries. Now that's a business story, and actually if you don't live in Malaysia, that's not going to be of interest to you. However, its biggest importer of that chicken was Singapore, and chicken rice made up basically the national dish. So what we did to cover that story, instead of going to Malaysia and hearing Malaysia's side of things, we went to a market in Singapore and we talked to a chef who was standing there cooking the chicken and the rice on his stand. And he talked us through, with an interpreter, he talked us through the prices, and it was oil, the price of oil that had also gone up as well. And so you put it in context of this is what it really means. And everyone can relate to food prices going up. But hearing that man with the sizzle of the chicken being cooked in front of him, and hearing him talk about how much it cost last week when he bought it and how much it cost that morning, really put it in context of what a huge story this is, with interest to so many people.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha, for sharing this story. And also, like, I remember when I first contacted you, you told me about you cover business, right? And not everybody is like interested or has the background on these topics. So you really need to work in layers, right? And really start building this awareness and knowledge to your audience. I see that there's, while you were talking, Sasha, there was a post-it that has been added to this Jamboard, which is the one saying a group of volunteers started to track the budget to ask where the money was going. We're not medical doctors, so we started asking, how can we help? This was how. That's a great starting point when we talk about context, but by reading it, my first question is, where did it happen? And why is this something that a global audience should be interested? And why you answer the question, where did it happen and why it's interesting, you actually answer the questions and you make the story even more relatable. So if you can think about this, it's already something that we've seen in your story short. Sometimes when we were asking, where did the story take place? Some of the respondents say it happened in the education sector. But when I read it, I don't know exactly where it happened. So my first question would be, please tell me where, so that we can already locate it and have a better understanding. I also see that there's a second one. So government contracts are often referred to as national cake in Nigeria because of the corruption in awarding them and the lack of accountability for the contractors and the governments the citizens do not have. So I guess that it's continuing, but it's really very interesting. I really like when we use that, like these national expressions, because already it makes me, why do you call it national cake? Like, I already want to continue reading it because it's interesting. It's a term that I wouldn't expect referred to contracts and corruption. So thank you very much for sharing that. Keep these in mind because we are going through this exercise together. So the next point of view, the next part of storytelling that we are going to see in our presentation, it's going to be conflict, which is another word that Sasha used. So that's really great because it's realigned with the previous story that you shared. Conflict is very important when we talk about storytelling. In this case, just by seeing this photo, you can see that there's something that is not working. There's something that needs to be fixed. This photo is taken from Kaduna, Nigeria. We did a video last year, again, from OGP. And this story in particular is about citizens monitoring infrastructure projects via an app that is called Eyes and Ears. So citizens really becoming the eyes and ears of government. How does it work? Well, citizens, they can input in the app a progress that has been made about a specific infrastructure project. In this case, it was regarding a clinic. And this citizen, she saw that there was very little progress related to the building of this clinic. So she, via the app, she was able to communicate to the government that works weren't advancing. And then she was contacted by the government, and eventually they were able to solve the issue. If we go to what do we mean by conflict and why does it matter for storytelling? Sasha kind of already answered these questions before, but we can go through more in depth. Also because we want you to have a look at this presentation and like the 4 C's of storytelling. It's very easy to remember. We started with character, we continued with context. Now we are continuing with conflict. So basically we have a character, we put it in a context, and now it's time to understand what's the societal issue that you're trying to solve through open government approaches. That's the focus of our stories. And why does it matter for us? Well, we say that the context is the backdrop of your story. Well, then conflict is the backbone. It's really helping us understand what is that you're trying to solve and how, what are the solutions that you're bringing to the table to solve it. And why it's important, because actually solving this conflict, that's what's going to eventually lead to a change. And that's what actually is going to implement open gov approaches. Conflict is really useful because it helps you to connect with others in the open government community, other people that are going through the same struggles as you are. Even storytelling, what we are doing today, it's part of it. Like we are here together because we all have the same issues when it comes to presenting and introducing a story. And by sharing it together and seeing other stories, you really can relate to other stories. So if we can go to like see an example of what do we mean by that? Well, here we have a photo from that protest of that character that introduced you at the beginning, Mabel from Argentina. You can really see just with this screenshot what's going on. Well, there's a demonstration there, there's a protest. And the quote that we added there is when the 2015 protest took place, it was different from how we used to protest before. This is actually making you understand that Mabel has been an activist for over 50 years. And you really can understand that there's something that is happening and that is different from what happened before. And this is like, if you want, a very evident conflict. That's a demonstration, there's a protest. But that's not always the case, right? So we also added another example to the presentation. If we can go to the next slide, which is what happened in Colombia with this student that we interviewed, Jimmy. During the pandemic COVID-19, he realized that the resources that Colombia promised that would be allocated in a certain way, they actually weren't. And all his family was sick and he ran out of drugs. So we really saw that there was a conflict there in the sense that like Jimmy started monitoring and auditing what was happening. And he realized that only half of the resources had been allocated. And then we can see how did he feel because of that? Well, he felt that the promise that the allocation was equal didn't happen. And so we actually covered this conflict throughout the video and then see how Jimmy's as an auditor help solve the issue in Colombia. And why did we present these examples? Because we want you to think in the next Jamboard that we're going to open, what prompted your project to start? What is this issue that you're trying to solve? With which reform? What are the obstacles that you're facing? And you can go ahead and populate the Jamboard together with us. You see that yesterday we've already some input in the Jamboard. Please go on and start filling it with what prompted your project to start. Was there a protest? Was there a community meeting? What were the obstacles that you were trying to overcome? We don't expect you to have a full answer. This is basically like just to ignite a certain type of thoughts, because then really what we want you to come back home with some knowledge and some more structure on how am I going to develop my story. So don't be shy, and please populate the Jamboard. Maya, do you want to come on board and maybe share something that we've seen over the past submission stories that we received during this first iteration of Open Stories?
Giving me an easy question. Thanks, Marco. Actually, I was just thinking that for me, often the conflict and the context is almost easier to start with than the character, because so often in open government, we are specifically working to solve an issue that people have, right? Be it access to decision-making processes or opening up registers. So we already have a given conflict and context that we're operating in. So starting from that, to me at least, feels easier than the character, because once you know what you're trying to solve, then
Yes.
finding someone within that is can give you an interesting perspective.
Yes,
can
thanks,
be an
Maya.
easier next step.
Thanks, Maya. I think it's, I agree with you with that. And while you were talking, we had our first submission there. So money has been disbursed from the national budget to facilitate these public projects to make citizens' lives better. A few 1% of the population decide to rob the majority. Monitoring projects aids the demand for, unfortunately, because maybe I should go into Jamboard and expand it, but I think it's, yeah. Yes, demand for accountability. Well, thank you very much. That's a very good one with regards to conflict. And I'm afraid we don't have a lot of time to discuss about it. I'll go on with the last C, and then I'm going to ask Sophie Abache from the OCP to come and share a story together with us before closing up. The last C that I wanted you to talk, that I wanted myself to talk about is conclusion. So of course, it's quite obvious, like we are writing a story, we started examining the character, the context, seeing what the conflict is and what are the solutions that we brought to the table. But we also want to be able to put an end to this story, which maybe it's not the perfect end, but it's okay. We just want to know what's next and what did change, what kind of impact did we have with our story. In this case, this photo is from Manila, Philippines. The photo is from Sarah that shares a story in particular of auditing public schools in Manila, schools where her kids are, to fight for better education, for a better education environment for her kids. How did it end up? Well, it ended up that via this example of a story, in the Philippines now, there's a very good example of auditing in schools that has been replicated throughout the world with this example that is called CPA, Citizen Participatory Audit. And that's how this story concluded in the specific case. But let's see what do we mean by conclusion? Why does it matter before passing to Sophie? As we said, we want to put an end to the story and saying, you know, how does this reform stand today and what's next? So we've seen with the character, with the conflict, with the context, certain elements, we want to be able to understand where we are today. And This is because like it's important to show at the end of your story that there has been some measurable and meaningful progress. As we said, it's not perfect always. In most of the cases, it won't be perfect. We really want to understand how did it affect people's lives, even if it's a small community, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we actually are in a progress. And this is important because we can share lessons that we have learned to the community so that the community can avoid repeating the same mistakes and really giving tips on how did you go with it and make the implementation of other and your peers easier. And eventually, this is really important because we are a community. And in community, it's important that we ignite hope. And with these stories, you can really have an impact on another person's life. We can see with the last example that we want to share, this example from South Africa, Zuki, a champion of open government that really is working to make budget information more transparent and more accessible for the public. We can see how did it end up. It ended up working side by side with government to host some data quests and hackathons to encourage civic actors to use data for social good in different projects and in different ways. All of these are videos that you can find on the Open Stories website, which is eventually what we want you to explore together with us. And now we can go ahead and just for a minute, populate the Jamboard and really answer these questions on what are there already concrete changes that you can share with us, impact that you can share with us, what are the outcomes that you hope that can be achieved. And keep in mind that what I've been saying to you, it's how does this apply to my story, to what I want to say? So really keep this in mind. Sasha, maybe just to close this conclusion in 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to be super fast, and then we'll ask Sophie to come on board and start with our presentation.
Sure. There isn't always a conclusion, and that is the frustrating thing with stories, and particularly in the world that I work in. You know, we deal with news that is happening here and now. If you are asking me for a conclusion to the war in Ukraine, well, we can't give you one, and yet we need to cover that story. There's nothing wrong in not knowing how things will eventually end up, but you can sort of give an update and return to stories. In fact, during the pandemic, we returned to some of our characters, our case studies, several times as the pandemic unfolded to see what was happening. And you can get experts predicting what the conclusion might be. And actually, sometimes if you don't have a conclusion, it sparks more interest in an audience who really root and really care about the characters, because they want to know what might happen in the future. Marco.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And it's also with a lot of pleasure that we invited today Sophie Abache from the Open Contracting Partnership. She's the digital strategist and contact manager at the OCP, based in Nigeria, right, Sophie? Yes.
Yes, Marco. I'm
yes.
based in
Great. And we invited her to tell us about the stories that she developed recently. She chose one in particular. I think that my colleagues put the link in the chat. Sophie, thank you very much for being with us today. And please go ahead, share your stories, and we're all ears.
Thank you, Marco, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Sophie, and I am the digital strategist at OCP. So at OCP, we are a silo-busting collaboration across governments, businesses, civil society, and technologists working in over 50 countries to open up and transform government contracting worldwide. So just think about public procurement, transparency, open data, etc. This session is basically about how we transformed our impact stories, which are long written, slightly advanced comp pieces, into short, sweet visual stories, which you're going to watch shortly. So first of all, I would need to go through a brief background of what impact means to us at OCP, because that is what all of this is based upon. At OCP, we have high standards of impact. We know that the journey to reforms is typically long, ongoing. Like Sasha just said, there's never really a conclusion. It consists of big and small wins. And what counts as a win may not be a win somewhere else, because it depends on context, you know, how advanced reforms are in that region or that country. And we have to tell these stories, right? Which is why we've categorized our stories into three. So we have impact stories, we have progress stories, and then we have data use stories. This is to ensure that we tell every story at whatever phase of reforms that they are at. So impact stories for us are long form narratives that try to capture systemic impacts from all actors involved. So you talk about government, civil society, journalists, businesses, and even citizens, because most of the time, full impact stories are a collaboration across different organizations and with different stakeholders. So our impact stories often contain several shorter stories demonstrating change, and we do some rigorous data analysis to identify reform indicators, such as, say, reduced cost or increased competition, etc. Then for our progress stories, they document the process on the way to impact. So the smaller wins are not necessarily like really big wins, but every point is important, right? So we highlight emerging changes in behavior, processes, regulations, etc. that we can think of as stepping stones towards eventual impact. Finally, we recognize that all change starts with innovative ideas. And that's why in our use stories, we highlight specific open contracting data, use, and approaches. For the purpose of this workshop, I'll be talking to you about the 5 animation videos we made out of our most relevant stories from Chile, Moldova, Colombia, Paraguay, and Ukraine. So we're going to watch the video about how open contracting, open public procurement data, and civil monitoring helps reduce the cost of medicines in Chile. If you can, please play the video.
Yep, I'll do that now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maya.
Sorry, I'm actually having, I need to restart Zoom to actually do this properly. Marco, could you try?
I'll try
There's
on
been
my
an
end.
update since last time. There you go. This is what you get for not updating Zoom before a meeting.
maybe I didn't update it. Let's see. Just a second. I'm gonna take this open. I'm not sure you can hear the audio. Let's see.
Yeah.
Struggled to access cheaper medicine and treatment. Healthcare was too expensive, taking sometimes more than 30% of the average household's budget. In a years-long effort, reformers in and outside the government opened up government deals for analysis and monitoring through open contracting data. Investigations into medicine purchases use the data to uncover direct awards, a lack of competition and conflicts of interest that had kept prices high. More transparency and better buying practices increased competition. Suppliers are more diverse, including women-owned businesses. Now, the government buys 2 out of 3 medicines at up to 80% cheaper. And the savings are passed on directly to citizens in the pharmacies.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we do. But yes, so that's our video, and that video was created from this longer story, which is about 3,000 words. So we published this story about Chile in January last year. And like I said, it was around 3,000 words, really long. And because it's a part of, and because a big part of our audience is interested and knowledgeable about the subject, over 50% of our visitors, our website visitors, actually read through the content, right? And based on Google Analytics, they spent around 4 minutes on the page. So we can say they really read the story. But then we wanted to widen the audience that's interested and engaged with the story. So we decided to do animated videos, which are shorter, more engaging content pieces. We don't really have time, so I'll just try to rush over this. One of our major goals when creating these videos was to bring in the human elements, like Marco talked us through for the 4 C's, right? The character. We needed to bring in the human element, relatable characters, and not necessarily through the scripts. So the video speaking to you as a human being, not necessarily the voiceover artist saying, oh, this is a kid and she's ill, you know. When we were planning the videos, the pandemic was still limiting travels. So going for an animation approach was a logical choice. In this Chile video, we can see the visibly ill kid in the car with her parents before the reforms. And then later, when she was now well and she was happy in the car with her parents. And we saw that, okay, more women are able to participate in the procurement process of medicines, which in my mind, that could be the little girl someday, right? Actually participating and in the process. So how did we actually go about all of this? That was the hardest part because the stories are really long. So what do you talk about and what don't you talk about? Like, you know, the impact stories, there are lots of elements, there are lots of strong characters, there are lots of organizations. So who do you put in it and who do you leave out? That was the hardest part for us. We had to cut further. The good thing about this is that each shorter version was helpful for other actors. So our team members at OCP have meetings and have, you know, conversations with all sorts of stakeholders. And we had to do like several short versions, like literally on document, you have the long version, we have a shorter version, we have an even shorter version. So at different times and for different platforms, there's one version that's going to be useful to you. Well, out of one of these short summaries, we're able to create these about 90-second videos, right? 90-word video scripts. Our structure for the video script was basically broken down into categories, challenges, the contracting approach, the open contracting approach, and then what the results are, right? So it was basically what the challenge is, what the open contracting approach that I was taking is, and then what the results have been. So how was it for us and what are some of the challenges that we faced? As mentioned above, we have focused on systemic impact and our stories and reform processes often touch on many actors. So deciding what part of the long story was the most unique or important to share is an ongoing challenge for we comms people. Also, due to the pandemic, the development process took much longer as several team members, both internally and externally, throughout our video production process, we're down with COVID at one time or the other. It took around like 3 months for the project to be completed. But yeah, kudos to our amazing video company, Bumbuku Creatives. So just rounding it up, I'm just going to say, based on Marco's 4 C's that we talked about earlier, the character was a little girl. We know that open government is about people and people connect better with people because they're more relatable. The context is that too many people in Chile couldn't buy medicines because they were really expensive and, you know, they couldn't buy. They were expensive because of direct awards, they were expensive because of competition, lack of competition, insufficient data for citizens to monitor and ask for better, etc. What was the conflict? Well, no matter your social class, no matter how rich or poor you are, the kind of health insurance you use, your gender, etc., everyone should be able to access healthcare and medication that makes you feel better when you're ill. So it's not acceptable. What is the conclusion? Well, those are the results we had. 30% decrease in the cost of medicines. And like Marco said, it ignited hope for the open contracting community and the larger OGP community, right? Because you can see that, okay, if Chile can do this, then maybe we can copy this thing that they did and see if we can make headway. Also, looking forward, what are the next steps to take? So the vehicles that we use to share these videos, of course, they're on YouTube for anyone to watch. Thankfully, the OGP Comms team has also put it on the Open Stories platform. And we also have dedicated country impact pages where we just put a summary of all country impact stories, including these videos. So thank you for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Like, this is a very good job that you have done at OCP, and we're very happy to host it also in our Open Stories website. It's really, really nice, and you've done a very good job, like summarizing everything into a 1-minute video, I know the struggle. And I don't know how many of us actually are today communications professionals. So it's really trying to give these skills and these tips for everyone in the community, because we realize that this is a community effort. So I'm afraid that we are at the end of this workshop. We are also prepared a 5th C, which is going to be in our presentation, which we called crafting, because sometimes when we write a story, there are a few tips that we can actually share with the community, like for example, like using active forms of verbs, or even tips for people like me, non-native speakers, that need to find the right word when we talk in a different language. So we are going to put it and add it in the deck that we're going to share with you. So I really wanted to thank you, Sasha, for being with us today, as well as Sophie. Really, thank you very much. And a big thank you to Maya, my colleague that helped me today with this session, and also my colleagues in the US that woke up early to be with us today. But also thanks to you, to the community that are coming. And I see from your comments that you find it useful, and this is really very good, because we didn't mean it to be a one-off session. We want these to build and to grow within OGP, but also within the community. So really thank you for it being a community effort. As I said, what do we hope from this? Well, we hope that you are now having a little bit more tools to develop your stories, and you can now go to Open Stories and maybe play a little bit with our form and start sharing with us your stories based on the tips that Sasha, Sophie, and myself have given to you. We'll share this presentation as well as a survey to understand how can we evolve this workshop in the future. For those of you who have colleagues that are working in a Spanish-speaking country, tomorrow we are hosting the last session of this workshop, so you can invite them to join tomorrow. And really a big thank you. It's been great talking to you and having your perspective, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye, Santino. Bye.